Okay, welcome back. We're on page 183 talking about a VPN. It's a way to tunnel through the internet, and there's two different types. We're not going to go through too much detail of that, but let me just explain a little bit about it. Remote access, which means I'm at home and I make a temporary connection. Typically, this is a VPN client that I buy. So, for example, I use NordVPN as mine, okay? And so I connect it when I want to connect to something sketchy or do something weird, okay? So that's the normal remote access. And then there's a site-to-site one. These are typically hardware-based. In other words, I have a piece of software from my company, not something I bought, that allows me to connect to a piece of hardware at their end. So software at my end and hardware at their end that does the verification and does this authentication and makes sure everything is cool. And then it dumps me out. So one is like a temporary, whenever I need it, I turn it on, like Nord. And the other is I connect to it when I go to my corporate LAN, and it stays connected the entire time. Now, but wait, there's a sneaky trick here. So let's say I'm doing this, and I connect to my corporate LAN, and I forget, right? I mean, I connect, and I'm doing some work, and I'm done doing work on my machine here, but I don't disconnect. And so I go to my favorite porn site. Look, I'm poking fun, guys. You got to, first of all, you have to engage in my bizarre sense of humor. Because I'm connected to their corporate LAN, my request for that porn site is going through the tunnel into the corporate LAN and being caught by their security system saying, you can't go there. And so the next day I go in the morning, they're going to say, go to porn sites again. You go, well, yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot. I mean, I forgot I was connected. So it's a cool story, but do you think this happens? Like maybe at Fort Hood this happens a bunch? Yeah, it happens. I mean, you don't typically get in trouble because you say, well, look, I'm sorry. I forgot I was still connected. Okay. App V. Page 185. This is another thing that's kind of sort of already obsolete. It was called application virtualization. And the idea was sort of like the concept of containers, if you've heard that term before, where an application could be configured so that it runs separate from the operating system. And you could just put these applications out like payroll. I take a payroll app and I just throw it out there and I just connect to it and magic happens. So we already know an awful lot about virtualization from installing like VirtualBox, right? So this is like a light version of VirtualBox that only contains the pieces of information that needs to run the application. So it's a pre-packaged application, typically installed on a server, and runs as if you had locally installed it. You just click on the thing and it's just as if you had the payroll application installed on your machine. It's not running, it's running virtual. By the way, this is a cool idea, but quite frankly, it's scheduled to be removed by April of 26. Okay, so we talk about it now, but it's already gone. Understanding file and print services, page 186. So one of the first uses of computer networks was being able to share files and print. If you had a machine, you had one giant color printer in the corner of the room, and you had 6 people in the room. Wouldn't it be cool if everyone could send print jobs to the print controller, right? Okay, now in the very, very, very old days, back in the like Novell days, you actually had to have a separate print server just to do print services. Now you don't have to have a separate thing. Well, first of all, I'm not talking about network aware printers because that became later, but okay. But there's some advantages in having a complicated print service scenario. Let me explain. Let's say you're in a high volume place like a lawyer's office, and you have like 3 laser printers that are designed to spit out documents like crazy. You submit a print job, it's going to pick the printer that is not currently in use, or it's going to pick the one that has the fewest number of pages in the queue. Now see how that works? If I have real print services on my server, I can, add printers. I can take a printer down and have the others pick up the load, load balancing kind of a thing. So it's got some really cool features we're not going to use in the class, but nevertheless. Okay, so let's get back to just the file services part. So Bobby created a spreadsheet and I want it. I mean, you could pass it to me on a floppy disk in the old days, or you could put it on a shared folder someplace, and I could go get it. That's what we're talking about. Gaining access to a folder on a remote system that everyone uses. Typically not your own machine, although you could do that. You could make shares on your machine. Now, typically you don't. Typically you have a separate file server, and mostly it's from an administrative point of view, and that is, in a corporate world, most likely your PC is not being backed up by the administrator group at all, right? So if you want something and you wanted to keep it secure, you put it on the file server because that guy is backed up. That's a practical reason for using file services right off the bat. Okay, so the file services role is kind of a given, although in our case we don't really need it. And if this was a real, honest to God, domain controller, I might be tempted to turn that thing off. Okay, but we're not. Okay, so the print and document services, PDS, the print and document services. This is all about print servers, right? And it'll do internet printing. It'll allow you to be someplace remote, sitting in a doctor's office, and you want to print something, and you could print to a printer at your office. Yeah, or actually you could do it at your home if you really wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend it. So that's what these things are all about. I'm going to skip a bunch of that stuff. So the thing here is when you're installing printers, if you just have one printer for one group, then you don't really need print services. I would just buy a printer that had a network card built in it, right? And just have it. It does its own print services, right? I don't need anything more. But if I'm going to have 5 or 6 in a big room, then yeah, I'm going to need real ones because I need more capability. I need that scheduling. I need to be able to do, load sharing and speed and all that stuff. Okay, cool. Page 193. Now we're talking about user rights and file permissions. So if you set up a file on a share, you're going to have permissions on it. Otherwise, the wrong people will be able to see it, or the wrong people will be able to write to it, or destroy it, or whatever. So this is complicated. So let me just get to this point. There's 2 levels of connection here. When you set things up, you can say full permission allows everyone can have read, write, modify, execute, change, do everything. Modify just means read and write. Read and execute means I can execute if it's an executable file. List folder contents, which means all I can do is just look. I can see the files, but I might not be able to open them. Read's fairly obvious, right? And special permissions are something we'll deal with a bit more. So the whole concept of being able to merge these things together. So if I have one permission that says you have read and another permission that says you have write, they get merged together into a single thing that says you have read and write. Okay, this is an example of how permissions might be set up. So I have a file share, and underneath that I have an accounting folder, a sales folder, an engineering folder. And underneath that I have one for accounts payable, receivable, and for an auditor. So here's how I would line these guys up. I would line up the groups on one side to create an access matrix, and then list all the folders across the top, and then figure out where the 2 meet, what kind of permissions you would get. So this is kind of sort of complicated, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail when we get to file shares, but I just wanted to give you a preview of coming attractions because this is kind of sort of complicated, and we are going to need to be able to do this. So here's an example. So group account payable has Bob and Sue. So Bob is in both of these guys. So Bob has, on some resource, he has a read and write. So what does he get? Does he get both read and write? Yes, he does. Okay, here's another one where I have account, but here I specifically said to deny write. So he gets read and write by virtue of the fact that he's in the account group, but I have denied him in the account payable. So a deny has higher precedence than an allow. So in this case, he does not get write permission in accounts payable, even though he was given it up here in account. All right, one more time. So here's So let's use Bob again. Bob is an account and payable. So account and payable, he's got read and write, but he's got a deny here. So does he still have write permission on the accounts payable? No, he does not. Okay. Again, we're going to go through this a little bit more detail, but for right now, that's what you need to know. So if I want to share a folder on the server for other people to do, then I need to set permissions at what's called the share level. Now, I'm going to pretend, okay? So I'm going to go here to my drive here, and I'm just going to pick temp something, whatever. And I'm going to go ahead and just go to properties and go to sharing. So one of the things you can do is you can just hit the share button. That'll set this thing up, or you can hit advanced sharing. So the permissions at this level are very, very small. All you have is full, change, and read. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So if I want to go ahead and do, all I get is full, change, and read. Now, I rarely use this top level permission thing at all. Let me tell you what I do use. I usually leave it like this, full control. And you might think, full control, you're out of your mind? Well, this is like a giant on-off switch. For example, this only has 3 permissions and it's set at the top. And so later I'm doing maintenance on a server. I want to kick everybody off the file server. I just go here and like a giant switch. Now you don't have write permission on it anymore. Okay? I don't have to go through individual folders and mess with things. So I use it in a slightly odd way of just cramming things down to the bare bones minimum and be able to turn things off and on. So this only affects people from the outside. The share permission, if I was to go in here and on the server go to temp, these permissions mean nothing to me. This is only for the share and the share alone. If I'm bypassing the share, it has no value whatsoever. Okay, let's go back to the other part where I'm doing NTFS permission. Okay, so I grab something and I do properties, and then now I go to security. Now here it's a heck of a lot more involved in. This is the ones we just showed you that list on. Full control, modify, read, access to blah, 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 blah. Okay? So it is kind of strange. There's 2 sets of permissions. A top level one that only affects the share, and then the NTFS permission, which affects everyone, even if you bypass the share. Got it? Good. So you're going to need to know the difference between those two. Okay, and by the way, always set the permissions at the domain local group. We talked about that before, right? Okay. Auditing, page 215. So let's say I want to track everyone who has been messing with some place in a file server. I have one particular location on a file server that I want to track every single time someone looked at it or modified it. Okay, that would be a kind of cool thing to do. So you do this from a policy, a group policy object. We haven't done that yet. I make a local group, a local policy group, or in the default domain group. I would enable this thing called object access, because by default, Microsoft does not allow you to track everything because it's just too time sensitive. In other words, it would slow your machine down if every single time somebody went to something, you had to say, wait, let me record that. You can imagine how that would be deleterious. Well, be bad for performance. Okay. And clearly, you would never do it on a domain controller. And then you would actually go in here and one of these guys, an advanced, and go to auditing. And this is where I would go in and say, okay, I need to go through and set this thing up. So every time someone does something, I want you to record it in the event log. Okay. So now if you miss that first step, the first step about enabling the feature, honestly, you don't get really any error messages at this point. You just get it just doesn't work. Okay, we've made it to the end of this chapter, and I'll see you guys again in the next chapter.